And thanks to everyone for being here this morning. I really always welcome the opportunities to think more deeply about the art that I'm most interested in, and this invitation from the Jung Center to have the perspective of the imagination as being the framework for thinking about the creative visionary experience. I found a really very attractive one, a compelling one for my own thinking. And then early in our conversations about developing a presentation for part of this weekend conference, I found myself thinking during those initial conversations how limiting it would be for me to talk about the experience of visionary artists, artists whose motivations and inspirations for their work comes from visionary experience, which is such a personal and essentially personal experience. So without having planned it as part of our discussion, I had the inspiration to invite a visionary artist to be part of this presentation, that no one would be able to express those ideas that we'll discuss this morning better than an artist themselves. And I immediately thought of my good friend Vanzant Driver, who I've known for 20 years, have admired his work, a piece of which is here in the auditorium this morning, and we'll focus some of our conversation and talk on the actual work itself. But I wanted to take a moment here at the beginning to thank Vanzant for his friendship, his willingness to participate, his ongoing willingness to have good, substantial conversations about his life and work. And I know that this morning will be the latest in a series of those conversations that we've had. So thanks, Vanzant.
Thank you.
I wanted to start off, though, by providing, as Sean alluded to, providing you with a little bit of historical background information from where I enter this world of visionary art, talk with you about some of the underpinnings of that, and then turn the presentation over to the conversation that Vanzant and I will have. What I'll hope to do during that time as well, and I'll remind you as well, but when Vanzant and I are having our conversation, we would like to have that conversation be with you as well. So as Vanzant and I may be discussing a particular point or idea or experience, and it raises comments, questions, we'd like for the audience to participate at that point. Sean will keep an eye out for people's interest if I'm distracted, but we won't leave questions and comments until the very end, but to have them be ongoing. In thinking about visionary art, I think about it as being part of a longer tradition that includes the genres and movements that are called art brut, which then evolved into outsider art. The history behind that is the painter and philosopher Jean Dubuffet in the 40s was protesting, to put it mildly, the conventional, institutionalized art of the day. He found that art that was being produced by the fine art, mainstream art world to be lacking in genuine creative nature. And he took it as his manifest goal to find and promote art that he considered to emanate from a more pure and genuine spirit of creativity than the art that was being produced during the day at his time. He did this in quite provocative terms. It was a time in art, in our history, when people wrote manifestos and had presented them at cultural events. And Dubuffet was doing that in his descriptions of what he called art brut, or raw art, which is the English translation. Dubuffet sought out art that was produced by these more genuine, essential processes, and his work and his explorations focused on the art of institutionalized patients in asylums throughout Europe. His idea was that these artists were extremely isolated from the norms of society, the pressures of society, the concerns of creating art for the culture and society. Their work was created from their own very idiosyncratic but very pure and personal aims and goals. The artist who he studied most closely was Adolf Wolfli, who spent most of his life in an asylum in Bern, Switzerland, creating work that represented an entire inner cosmology, including characters, cryptic text, and even musical annotation. It's almost as if he created a personal world of his own that was then expressed through his art. Dubuffet's idea was that artists like Wolfli were creating art with no knowledge of the art world that they were creating in. They were creating only for themselves and not for an audience, certainly not for any commercial acclaim or reward in that respect. Also within this world of art brut, which then became, for an English-speaking audience, what is called outsider art, the artists are often self-taught. Their work, they've not gone to art school, they've had no formal training in art. So not only the inspiration and the content of their art comes from an essentially personal place, but also the means of their art making comes from themselves. So oftentimes their art only looks like their own. Their art is immediately recognizable as their own without clear references to anything that has occurred historically or having influences of those other artists who may have, have preceded them. Visionary artists, artists whose work emanates from visionary experience, have been folded into this or under this umbrella of outsider art, in that their work is also produced outside of the conventions of the mainstream art world. It's produced for those purposes and reasons that are essentially different than an academically trained artist whose work, while having a great deal of, not to discount, creativity and purpose and meaning, may also be part of a career path or part of the culture and mainstream society in which their art plays a part. The visionary artist is creating their work as a response to and as an interaction with their visionary experiences. And in that way, makes them in some ways part of what's thought of contemporarily as outsider art. What I'll share with you briefly are some examples of outsider artists, prefaced by some thoughts from Rebecca Hofberger, who is the founder and director of the American Visionary Art Museum in Baltimore. A wonderful place. If you get to Baltimore or Washington, I'd recommend a visit there. The museum is dedicated to visionary art and artists and describes their interpretation of visionary art in this way, which matches up very nicely with an idea that Carl Jung expressed about art as being an innate drive, a motivation that is in some ways not under the individual's control, but that the creativity is a response to that, and that the artist, Vanzant and I have touched upon this in many of our conversations, you know, the artist is the means through which those impulses and visions, in the cases that we're talking about today, flow. The first example that I'll talk with you about briefly is Reverend Howard Finster, who may be the country's most famous folk and outsider artist. Howard Finster was a itinerant storefront preacher who one day had a vision from God that told him to create sacred art. Howard talked about his visions a great deal and represented them in his art. His art often illustrated his visions of other worlds and angels and other inhabitants of those worlds. He thought of his art very much as a way of communicating the messages of God that were flowing through him. In his vision, he was directed to create 1,000 pieces of art. Howard didn't stop at 1,000. He ended up, through his lifetime, creating 50,000 pieces of art. He also erected, and Vanzant, I thought this quote would be interesting to you, that Reverend Finster says, "I took the pieces you threw away and put them together by night and day." And we'll talk about that with your work as well.
Beautiful.
Howard Finster also created an environment around his home called Paradise Garden. When Victoria and I, my wife, visited Howard Finster and talked with him personally, one of the main things I came away with, and that was very much a good lesson to me, was how genuine and earnest Reverend Finster was when talking about his visions. This was early on in my collecting career and my understanding of outsider and visionary art, and to experience his experience as a real thing was very powerful to me. I remember reading about a conversation with Reverend Finster his work was being included in the Venice Biennale. And a reporter asked him, Reverend Finster, are you going to be going to Venice? Are you going to be going to Venice? I gave away the punchline, to see your art. And Reverend Finster responded, I've been to Venus several times and I don't need to go again. Howard Finster was not laughing when he told that story. He was genuinely relating an experience that was true to him and his artistic experience. In the same vein, Sister Gertrude Morgan was an evangelical preacher who preached and performed in the French Quarter in New Orleans. Her life and work were the direct result of visionary experiences that resulted in her perception of herself as a bride of Christ, that she represented in her paintings, this one titled Jesus is My Airplane, where Sister Morgan and Jesus are in the airplane flying over her representation of the New Jerusalem. For Sister Morgan, who spent her adult life on the streets of New Orleans, these experiences were very real and genuine to her and gave great purpose to her life. As an aside, at her Everlasting Life Chapel, the front lawn was made of four-leaf clovers, which is interesting. In a somewhat different but similar vein, Minnie Evans, who lived and worked in Wilmington, North Carolina, was another visionary artist whose work sprung from childhood experiences. Minnie Evans described her childhood as being predominated by what she called daydreams, or dreams with her eyes open. She found these dreams and reports of her childhood were that she was a very distracted child. She would follow the visions of her daydreams as a child. She didn't do well in school. She was a bit incorrigible and was thought of by her adults as being, just somewhat strange and hard to manage. In her later life, Minnie Evans came to work as a gatekeeper at a botanical gardens that grew up around a former plantation. And her visions began to take on the organic and floral forms of the environment that she found herself in, and also came to reflect the spirit eyes and visages that had been part of her childhood and adult experiences, but also reminiscent of the lush flora and fauna of the Garden of Eden. Her art melded what were the visionary aspects with what we would think of as the realities of her life, but which for the visionary artist and Minnie Evans were one in the same. A Houstonian who I'll talk about briefly is Henry Ray Clark. Henry was a visionary artist whose visionary experiences did not spring from an expressly divine source, but from a more earthbound place. Henry Ray Clark was a petty criminal, I've come to think of Henry as a serial entrepreneur. He was not a violent criminal, but a criminal in ways that made him money. As a result, he spent most of his life in various prisons throughout Houston and Texas, most of which were in Huntsville. There, using pen and manila envelopes that he scavenged from the prison commissary, Henry drew his visions of his nocturnal travels to far-off galaxies. He experienced these nocturnal travels as real experiences. I had several conversations with Henry, and as I mentioned, with Reverend Finster. Henry was both adamant and genuine in his report of meeting the alien beings that inhabit the interior sections of his drawings. What I came to learn as well from knowing Henry is that the qualities that he ascribed to these alien beings were also qualities that he aspired to and ascribed to himself. So in some ways, he and his drawings were as one. Henry aspired to be an inspiration. So this drawing, titled "I Am a Day Star," speaks to some of those motivations in Henry Ray Clark's life. And his quote, which was up at the beginning, that as long as he can create art, as long as he can make something beautiful, as long as he can leave his cell at night and travel to these other realms, he would never be truly imprisoned. And his experience of that bore that out, I think. Someone who, but first, just an idea of moving into a little bit of the fine art world. An artist like Van Gogh had much to say about the place of dreams in the content and process of his work. And I like this quote in terms of what comes first and what follows, and that the process of dreaming, another version of imagination, was essential in his work. Someone with a connection to the Jung Center is the artist Forrest Bess. Forrest Bess's work is not confined to the outsider art world. His work has been embraced by the fine art world. However, his experiences and his art have much to do with and much in common with the outsiders. Forrest Bess was consumed by the view of man and nature, his own view of man and nature, and developed a resulting system of beliefs and practices that were directed at achieving a perfect human being. This became the essential pursuit of his life that his art was a part of. This idea of his involved the reconciliation of the dualities present in man and nature, such as divine and evil natures, the conscious and the unconscious, as well as a blending of genders and sexuality. Forrest Bess talked about his visions of his symbols coming to him in that gray area between wakefulness and going to sleep, where he would see these symbols that he came to view as opportunities for access to his unconscious, which would then allow him to merge conscious and unconscious states into this more perfect union. Forrest Best, in pursuit of his own ideas, carried on a correspondence with Carl Jung, explaining to him his ideas about man and nature. Forrest Best's letters are in the archive of the Menil collection and also online, and are interesting to read and learn more about. In a somewhat different vein, in the visionary experience, is the art of Madge Gill. Madge Gill lived and worked in England. She was an illegitimate child during the Victorian age, and early in her childhood, she was shipped to Canada as in a foster program, which in historical hindsight appears to have been more of a child labor scheme, in that many children were sent to Canada to live and work on farms. Families were paid to have them, and their childhood was spent working on farms. Madge returned to England as a young adult. She married, but had the experience of losing two of her children in infancy. In the 20s, she began to experience delirious trance-like states and was visited by a spirit guide that she named Mihinterist. It's a hard name to spell and say. She worked as a medium, conducted seances, and experienced what she called spontaneous prophecies, which sounds like telling the future, which we talked a little bit about last night. Madge Gill also had in her practice drawing as a mediumistic practice of her own. What's compelling, one thing that's compelling about Madge Gill's drawings are the faces of the young girl that appears throughout her drawings, immersed in these highly patterned worlds. And moving more into the modern world, Alex Grey is an artist who has become very much identified with modern visionary art. Alex Grey was born and works in Columbus, Ohio. His work springs from a transcendent experience as a result of the use of hallucinogenics. His paintings reveal human beings as being interconnected, both at cellular and cosmic levels. These works are large, and they're amazing to see in their technicolor strength. And then lastly, on the subject of the future, many aspects of visionary art can involve visions of the future. And Alex Maldonado was one of those. Alex was born in Mexico and emigrated to California in the Bay Area in the early 1900s. He was a ship worker and factory worker, and also a professional boxer. And after his retirement, he turned to painting his visions of the future. he was fascinated with the future of technology and created fantastical worlds of future places. Thinking about futuristic visionaries brought me to just a couple of ideas about the term visionary and how it's used in present day outside of the world of art. What I find is that often visionary is being applied to people within the business world, that they are able to see into the future, to be innovative in their businesses. Leonard Lauder, one of the founders of Estee Lauder, seems to have a very pragmatic approach to being a visionary, someone who can see into the future or thinks he sees into the future. And he sees it as a very functional skill, knowing what people want, knowing the market, knowing where to go. And of course, Steve Jobs, in any short biography of Steve Jobs, he is described as a visionary. People talk about Steve Jobs as creating products for people before they know they want them. Being able to see around the corner of a technology or an application. And so within our current business, mercantile-oriented world, the term of visionary has been applied more and more to those people and those experiences as well. And I just thought they provide an interesting counterpoint to the creative artistic process that we've been talking about and that we'll talk about more this morning. And as I said at the offset, my primary goal was not so much to talk about visionary art and visionary artists, but to talk to the artists about the art. And so if we can, that's where I'll turn my attention to at this point and introduce Vanzant Driver again to you. And give you just the briefest background of my own with Vanzant. When I started coming to Houston in the late 80s and early 90s with this beginning interest in outsider and visionary art, people who I would talk to, I quickly learned about Vanzant Driver as someone who had created a body of work from a visionary realm, which included these glass chapels. The intriguing part, if these were not enough to be intriguing, were that Vanzant had created these works, brought them out into the world through a process that he'll describe, and then dropped out of sight. And Vanzant had taken on this somewhat mythical place within the arts community in Houston as I was getting to know it. Important people had been exposed to and saw Vanzant's work. This piece is in the Menil collection. It was presented to Mrs. de Menil through Sheila, I assume, but we'll talk about that. these glass chapels, people had seen them in other people's homes. And again, the artist was ephemeral. And so Vanzant's work became, a bit of a holy grail for me. I wanted to see them, learn more about them. And so always had them in mind as I was looking at and looking for art. Until one day I get a call from the Menil bookstore telling me that they had heard from Vanzant Driver and he was going to be stopping by with new work. And might I want to be there when he arrived? The next thing they heard was click. And I was on my way to the bookstore where I met Vanzant that day and began a relationship and a long-running conversation with him about his life and his work, and am privileged to continue that today. And again, thanks, Vanzant.
Thank you for having me.
We talked about a place we might start because it's often informative, is how did your work, that original work that I heard about when I came to Houston, how did that work begin? Where was its inspiration? Where did it come from?
The beginning of this work happened to happen over a baseball game. In fact, my sister's here, and we had, my parents had 7 children, and playing baseball every evening was just a part of our life. And it began to rain this particular day. So we finished the last ending inside the house. My turn to bat. Hit the ball and hit one of my mother's vases. Her pride and joy vase. I'm sure you ladies can identify with that. So my thing was to try to put it back together. And it just didn't happen the way it should have happened. But that's when the knowledge of the glue and the glass came together. I said, well, hey, this does stick, but maybe not the right way, but it sticks. So it just became like a hobby. I'm not one like to sit around much and just stare at the walls. I have to do something when I get bored. And so this has become a part of my life for boredom. But later in life, it became more of a thing where I was learning from people. Everybody that would come to my apartment or my house would say, hey, this is nice. But you know how things can just fly over your head? Maybe people are just being nice. And I started noticing this pattern for years. And another pattern I noticed, that anybody that comes around these sculptures, the desire to touch is there. So that was kind of striking to me. I started noticing these patterns. Now everybody knows that's glass. It can cut you, but everybody wants to touch. And I was going through some things back in the 80s. I had got this hand crushed on the job. I was married and I came home one day, my wife wasn't there. And so this all happened at the same time. And many times in life, we all cross those roads where things are out of control. And what life have taught me, and I've tried to pass this down to my children, that life, I like to use the Bible as a reference point. We're not having church today, but just as a reference point. When man says in the Bible that God scooped up man from the earth and breathed life in man, if we hold the pause button right there and just examine what that's really meaning, our life is going to be just like the earth, because why? We are product from the earth. And that's the common denominator for all mankind. We all come from this product called earth. And each individual that's born, life will have similarities to earth. In other words, there's those cycles. Everything that God created, it's a cycle to it. The earth goes around in a cycle. The sun goes around the earth in a cycle. Our climates change yearly in a cycle. Everything God made, there's a cycle to it. And because God made us from the earth, our life will be just like the earth. It's going to be some cold days sometime. And I don't mean that just physically. You can just have those days where you wake up and just seem like everything feels like it's wrong and it's nothing wrong. Then you have those days where the sun is shining, perfect weather, everything is going smooth in life. But such is life. You're going to have those, high moments, like mountains, and then you're going to have those low moments. And our bones in our body are just like the rocks on the mountains. It's a timeless situation. And that's what's so beautiful about art. The artists that he was just talking about, they're dead and gone. But their legacy is like the rocks or like a person's bones. They will stay on forever. And it's all, the bottom line is to be an inspiration. That's the medicine for life.
Vanzant, can you talk a little bit along that point of inspiration about how your art came to be this? How did it come to take this form? And what is this form? What meaning is within this form that it's taken?
It's a spirituality. And the only, basically, me and this gift would be this lady by the name of Sheila Rosenstein, if anybody remember her. This would not be there. That would not be there if it wasn't for her. So she's the only me in this work because it's all about inspiration. She inspired me. And I think that's the best medicine in the world for a soul, is to just be inspired.
Sheila was an important person in the Houston arts community. She, for a while, ran the store at the Contemporary Arts Museum.
Yes, she did.
And then at the Menil Collection bookstore. You, as I know, took your sculptures to the museum and were wanting to introduce them to the community. And I'll let you fill in the details of that story, but you were turned away from those institutions and found your way to Sheila and the CAM, and she welcomed them and helped introduce your work. But you can talk more about your relationship with Sheila as well.
Yeah, that's a spirituality part of it. That's one of the messages that this work puts out, is that this is trash. The materials were stuff that was supposed to be in a trash can and threw away. But the spirituality part is the inspiration. This is the message. This work is the saying that Frederick Douglass said when slavery was over. He told the slaves, because they were in a situation where some would say, well, hey, slavery is better than freedom. And he told them, I know you're scared of this new life. He said, but cast your net where you are. And the same thing Jesus said to the disciples. They had went fishing, trying to catch something. And they said, Jesus, we toiled all day, and we don't have nothing to put in the net. And he told them, cast your net where you're at. And that's what this work was. When I came up here to talk to Sheila, I had just had a bad accident on a job I had. Like I said, went through losing my wife. Didn't know how long my lights were going to be on because I didn't have money to pay the bills.
And you had been already, just kind of for a timeline, you had already been creating that work.
That was always for tension release, okay, and just something to do when you're flat bored to death. But when I came down to the museum, it was one of those things where it's good to have someone feed you spiritually. And this pastor at this time that I had, he put a lot of emphasis on faith. And so in the situation I was in at that time financially and mentally, which a lot of people right now today are experiencing these stresses that are so powerful in this life we live at this time. This was the way out. My father had 7 children, and mind you, we were born in the 50s. He didn't believe in welfare. I remember the times as a young man when the government truck would come, and I'd watch our neighbors and friends go load up. My mother couldn't do it, and 7 children. So I thought my dad was crazy for not taking advantage of this. Well, because of him and what he taught me and my brothers and sisters, the type of God that rules this universe, he has many names. Some call him Buddha, some call him Allah, some call him Jesus. But at the end of the day, this is a force that man cannot see with his eyes. No man can take you to God's house. But there are spirits that can connect you to him just like a cell phone connects you to somebody across the world. And that's what this gift came down to. There's a message that God is trying to show man through this work. And it's befitting for right now as the economy, as people are losing jobs. People that have jobs don't even know what's going to happen tomorrow. Have money in the bank. You don't know if the computers are going to shut down. You can't even get your own money. That's where we're at in this life. But God is trying to send a message through this work that never give up on him. never give up on him because he works in mysterious ways. And that was mysterious. How can trash from ditches end up in one of the most renowned museums in the world, right here in Houston, Texas, Museum of Fine Arts? And now here to participate in the Jung Center, which I just found out this morning that it was created by women in the 50s. And some of y'all that's was in the 50s, you can know women have come a long way from that point. And for that goal to be achieved even then is parallel to this work. It's all a gift, and through the gift, the message should be to every individual. If you want to feel good every day, if you want this old world to be better, it starts with us as individuals. And every day we should wake up and say, you know what, I can't wait to get somewhere to inspire somebody. I can't wait to get somewhere and lift somebody's spirit up. And that's what this work is all about, lifting up spirits. And I appreciate that. I hope I didn't take too long.
That's a good start. And maybe a good spot to ask some questions or make comments.
Tell us about Sheila and that encounter. And she was your guardian angel or your messenger.
Or
In one sense, wasn't she?
you could say the everything of this work. I remember the first time I saw her, I was talking to the security guard because I was telling him about I had a gift that I needed some direction on. And as me and the security guard was talking, Sheila was coming through the door. And she told the security guard to have him bring some of his work to her office. So when he showed me the way to her office, she had these reading glasses on and she was handling business on the phone, but I could see through her eyes the love, the compassion, and the spirit. And the way she looked over the glasses and told me just to hold it, that you're important. You're a human being, you're important. And that was a lot of love I felt come from her, that she took the busy time of her day just to hear what a nobody had something to say. And if that's not love, you tell me what it is. Because sometimes we can feel we're too much in this life, that we don't have time to maybe see a homeless person and just help them out sometime. And when she took interest in the work, that lifted my spirits. And that's what is needed today. People need their spirits lifted. With the economy the way it is and things are so shaky now, you'd be surprised what that can do to an individual. They might not even communicate it to you, but as they go on their way, they was inspired, and they can go home and inspire the family. And where there's positive energy, there can be positive results. And that's why I feel belated to be a part of the art community here in Houston, because you know, I travel for a living. I drive 18-wheelers for a living, so I've been over this whole country for many years. And everywhere I go, everybody wants to come to Houston. And everybody knows we're such a diverse city. But if you live here like most of us do, you can see that, man, it's a lot of growth, a lot of more good things can come out of Houston than what we have. We could be a much stronger city, a much safer city. But again, as the positive things we were talking about a while ago, there's also the negative spirits in this world that we have to be aware of. I call them demonic spirits. And their presence whenever you don't feel comfortable. They come in many different ways. They're spirits. as me and Jay was having this conversation a couple of weeks ago, the most powerful things in this universe are the things you can't see. The most powerful things in this universe are the things you can't see, such as our Creator, such as the air that we breathe. You can't grab air. It has no color to it. But buddy, if it all leaves, we're dead. That's a lot of power. And that's the nature of God. He lets us invent a lot of these things that make us feel brilliant. But it's the simple things that he keeps secret.
And Vanzant, is it also, yesterday we were talking about the why of art. The important question to ask an artist is why.
Good question.
And I hear you saying that one of the whys with your work is to give form to those things that we can't see and know, but that your art provides a means of
Physical faith.
physical, yeah, good.
And that's the thing in this life. The spirituality, there's spirits, there's demons that we have to be aware of. And it's just like I was explaining to a lot of people when this first got started. You see, in spirituality, it's like getting on the right wavelength to receive the blessings and the power and the visions. Many times in my travels, I'll see these big machines breaking up the highway or blowing up a building to build a new one, and they use this dynamite, and you see all the dust, and because they're moving the concrete. That's a lot of power in those machines. But at the same time, you can go walking down a sidewalk and you will see a root of a tree that done pushed up thousands of pounds of concrete. And that's how you relate the power of God. He's not this thing that has to make a lot of noise. God gives us the power, just like through the root of a tree. We might be a man or a woman, which is nothing compared to a machine. But when God gives you this resource, you can be just as powerful as that root. You may not make a lot of noise. You might not blow up a lot of dust, but you have the power to change things. And this is what we have to put in our persona to help us with family problems, social problems. We have to believe that that power can be put in us to change things. And my heart cries out for our city here sometimes, because we just have to be real about things. We're going to have to what? Get control in love to beat out the hate. And that's an event like we're having today, just having the discussion about it. Somebody can leave here and what? Inspire others. And let us work on these common denominators. Because that's where the world, this is America. We have so many immigrants now coming in this country. We have so many social issues that we're not used to having. And the solution is common denominators. Let's sit down and talk common denominators. I'm not going to try to push this on you. You don't try to push this on me. But let's have, and the arts are the foundation for this great change in this city, to have more love here.
Van, yesterday we were talking about this in a similar way, and you also included some ideas that I thought were really interesting about Einstein and physics and the universe. stars and light. Can you weave those ideas? I wanted to come back to them after talking about them yesterday, and this might be a time to weave in that some of that thought.
You made me think about, I remember in high school, I was always fascinated with Einstein. And I remember reading a book that he said, as human beings, we are particles of light to the universe, which I just thought he was a mad scientist at that time when I was a younger man. But now some time have evolved, I can relate to what he was talking about. In other words, we are so insignificant as human beings to the big picture. But these are gifts from God. When the man is on the right combination with God, he'll be like that root of the tree. That's a miracle when you see a root of a tree push up concrete from the ground. It's a miracle when a man like Einstein, he didn't have no computers. How did that knowledge for him to put those different molecules and break down protons, how did that happen? Why come I couldn't do that? Why come another person couldn't do it? It's all about that combination with that spirit.
Yeah. He might say the same thing about these.
It's all about on that spiritual spirit. And Einstein had it. It's a gift that God opens up your mind. Look at the work that Dr. King did. He was on the right to help people. And it's like with artists. You have some that get into it because they want to make a lot of money. You have some that get into it because they want to what? Be a positive influence. And the only way to be happy in this life is to put out love. You can throw stones all you want, but at the end of the day, when you can lay your head on your pillow that evening and say, I've inspired somebody. I've gave somebody some hope today. And that's what makes things great.
Please.
I would like to ask, if possible, on a practical level, how you tune in. How do you see a piece of something, if you can identify the steps? How you see a piece of something and then it turns into this expression?
Good question.
Not about God sending me this or that, which is very general, very, very strong belief I have. But is it possible to put it into a application, step by step, that you do, or that something does, that you turn the channel and you know you're there? Or you're not there and you identify you're not there, but I know I can go here and turn the channel and now I can receive. Is that possible?
I totally understand you. That's why it's called a gift. Because to me, your desires, if somebody really want to help mankind, if those desires are pure, and God knows that you want to help somebody, then that's when the blessings come. That's when that tune that we were talking about, that's when you know you're connected. That's when you'll feel God, when you know you're doing whatever you're doing for the right reason, and that's to help somebody. Because when it's a selfish situation, who can feed off of selfishness? Selfishness cannot help anybody. It's only individuals who's willing to give. That's what love is, a giving thing. And that's how the connectors from God or the satellite from God comes in, when your motive is pure. And meeting Sheila, all that was no mistake. And meeting Jay, meeting y'all today was no mistake. So those are the good things to come when the motive means well. And that's all that, the only me in this for me is to like to make this city the light of the world. Houston has a great chance for that. Houston has a great chance, but we can lose it. And only love can keep us together. And one saying, and I can't get long-winded, which Jay and his wife will tell you I can, but I just want to say this here. When we as Houstonians can start concentrating on our common denominators rather than our own little selfish interests, and we as the art community, in fact, art plays a big part in American history of making us what we are today. And I think Houston has the great opportunity to change the world. We have it here because we're the most diverse city. And if we can show the world how we can get along and how we can grow, and I know I can get long-winded, so we're just going to cut that.
We've got a couple more questions,
Oh.
too.
One thought that I had, or what thing I've been questioning about this whole imagination, I know that certainly, there is a God because we got stars and, and we got grass and we got birds and animals, and man didn't create that. But what I wonder as it opposed to imagination, we've had throughout history scriptures and text and art and everything. Could sometimes what we call God, could that be the imagination in man?
I could understand that. And if you look at it from a court system point of view, nobody can say, okay, I believe in Buddha, and here's the evidence, or I believe in Allah, and the Quran is right. I got evidence. It's all a mind thing. But my thing is, when you have peace, then you have God. And different religions, sometimes we have to think out of the box to get to God, in my opinion.
And is it that imagination?
It's
that brings
it's the imagination. The imagination is the most powerful spirit. Like when a doctor cut our brains open, he can say, well, this part of the head, there's the brain, but who can see the imagination? Who can see it? Who can grab it? Nobody can. But your imagination have the ability to work better than medicine, which I've been in those cases before, getting sick out on the road in my 18-wheeler. And one incident, and I'm sure many of y'all can identify with this, sometime in this life, you can get tired of being tired. And a day will come, you'll just look up in the sky and say, God, you know what? I wouldn't care if you take me today. For whatever reason, I'm so disappointed or whatever. But sometimes situations, like a situation that happened to me some years ago, I was delivering a load up to Pennsylvania. And it had already snowed the day before up there. Well, I had my heater on, and I was 80 miles from the place. And I started sweating. So I turned the heater off, and snow is outside. I should be cold, but I was sweating. And a pain came across my chest that I couldn't shift my gears on the truck. And when I looked in the mirrors, I saw nothing but a bunch of cars behind me. Like, man, dude, you need to hurry up. But I couldn't reach the shift. 30 minutes later, when I finally got to the place where I was going to unload, the fellas, they knew me because I had come there several times. They came out, hey, Van, pull it over there. And the guy looked at me, he said, you know what, Van? He says, you look terrible, man. He said, man, what is wrong with you? I said, man, I just got this pain in my chest and I'm sitting here sweating. He said, well, do you want me to call 911? And it was just one of those days where, Lord, you know what? I'm just tired. All these problems, all these pressures. I told him, don't call the ambulance. Because I was at that point. I just was tired. They unloaded me, and they still said before they left, man, you're welcome to sleep here, but you need to go see a doctor. But I prayed to my God. I said, God, I know that you can fix this situation. I don't have to call the ambulance. I said, I know you can fix it. I said, now if it's something I've done so terrible that I have to feel like this, if you can find somewhere in your heart to forgive me, God forgive me, but this pain is too much. I could not get out of the seat to go back there to the sleeper. That's how much pain was in my chest. I could not get out of the seat. So about 15 minutes later, I finally made it back there to my sleeper. And in the middle of the night, I woke up back there in my sleeper. I was kind of scared to move because of the pain that I remembered that was here. But long story short, I started moving a little more and moving a little more. And to this day, my sister over there told me, she's a doctor, and she told me to go get checked out and tested and stuff. But the spirituality part of that that's when you know you got that divine connection. When you can put all your faith in those kind of situations, when trouble happens in your life or whatever problem happened that you can't even talk to some people about. God is there. He's that power.
And that's where we're going to have to end. We're
just getting started. We're just getting started. And thank y'all so much. Thanks for the beautiful questions.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.